You're listening to the 10-2 Blue Brief, a podcast by the Public Safety Broadband Technology Association. Good evening, everyone. This is Chuck Dowd, retired Assistant Chief from the New York City Police Department, former board member of the FirstNet Authority. I did 35 years at the NYPD, and today we're going to be talking with Chief Fred Farris from Gladstone, near Kansas City. And we're going to be discussing they have a kind of a unique arrangement there that you don't see all over the country. And I would think that it's something that other law enforcement and fire agencies and first responders would want to emulate. It's a regionalization of their assets. On September 11th, 2001, if you had, actually the day before, on the 10th, if you had asked the NYPD or the FDNY, would they need outside help, we would have politely said thanks, but we got it. Well, we found out differently on September 11th, 2001, that wasn't the case and that we did need a lot of help. So I'm going to ask Chief Farris to introduce himself and to talk a little bit in general about what regionalization means to him. So Fred, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Chuck. I appreciate the invitation to be here with you guys today. My name is Fred Farris. I'm currently the Chief of Police with the Gladstone, Missouri Police Department. We're a inner-tier suburb of Kansas City, Missouri. So we're completely landlocked by Kansas City. So we're kind of like the belly button, I guess. I'm 36 years in law enforcement. This is my second job as a police chief. I spent about 4 years in a suburb of Wichita, Kansas. Prior to that, I was 22 years in Lenexa, Kansas, another suburb of Kansas City. And then I started off my career with Kansas City, Missouri Police Department when I was young and had a lot more hair. And that's kind of my story. My adult life's been in public safety in some form or another.
So Fred, help the folks to understand when you talk about regionalization of assets in a general sense, on a 20,000 foot level, what are we talking about?
You brought up the catalyst that caused that discussion, and it was 9/11. I know how it affected you and your region. The rest of the regions around the country were scrambling and kind of taking that same approach, like, hey, if New York City can't handle this, how the heck can we handle it? In the Kansas City area, we were very fortunate already to have an incredible atmosphere of cooperation. So the Kansas City metropolitan area is divided by the state line of Kansas and Missouri. Half our metro sits on one side, the other half sits on the Missouri side, which is kind of the anchor, with Kansas City, Missouri being the large city. We already had kind of that atmosphere of cooperation and collaboration, but even that worried us, that if we had something sizable or another event or a large, we had several active shootings, and it began the discussion of like, are we prepared individually? The answer is probably no, not even the big departments. So how can we get around that? Well, when all that wonderful Homeland Security funding started rolling into the states and through the feds, rather than doling it out and individual agencies applying for, we want this, that same regionalization concept came together, and the power players at the time decided, we're a lot better as a group than we are a bunch of individuals. So as that equipment and those lists and all that training, we started realizing, hey, we need this. And not just in law enforcement. I'm talking fire and EMS, urban search and rescue, public health, everything from the mortuary services to, rescuing lost pets like they had to deal with in Katrina. And we realized that there was a great opportunity to take that Homeland Security money, regionalize those assets, have the agencies contribute the manpower, and let the equipment and training be purchased with that grant money. So we created these regional teams, specialty teams, if you will, to handle pretty much everything we could conceptualize happening in the Kansas City area, and then putting all that money into those systems.
Fred, let me ask you. So we had talked earlier, and you talked about or gave an example. And this is something that we studied too in the NYPD, as far as you don't want to run out of resources if you have some sort of an attack And now you realize it's not just one attack, it could be multiple attacks. And so you mentioned and our SWAT is what we call our emergency service units. And we realized that if there were multiple attacks, we would have to source from other places in the police department in order to be able to address that. So tell me about your experience with your each entity out there, I guess, has its own SWAT. How does that work? How do you guys collaborate to respond to something that requires that kind of a SWAT response?
So what we created was, and not every agency here has its own SWAT team. Mid-sized departments and up generally have it. Some of like Kansas City, Missouri is big enough; they have a full-time team. A couple of the bigger agencies have full-time teams. Everybody else were collateral duty teams. Like my team was collateral duty. What we decided to do was create what was called the Kansas City Metro Disaster Tactical Response Team. And when it was created, all the chiefs were put in a room, and we threw out this idea of what was going to happen, what we wanted to create, and we solicited, I think it was 8 agencies on the Kansas side and 2 on the Missouri side, and we created this regional WMD/terrorist response SWAT team. Once that was created, that gave us about 120-ish SWAT operators. Then we used all that funding to purchase the high dollar equipment, the Bear vehicle. We bought 2 Bears, 4 Bearcats, SCBAs for everybody, PPE, trailers to haul them, the training, the hours and hours and hours of training. We came up with standards post initial training. So we got this core trained up in about, a year and a half or so by bringing in FEMA and sending people off to the FEMA training center down in Alabama. So we got everybody trained to the same level. And that gave us that.
That's important, isn't it? That's an important
100%.
aspect of it. Yeah.
You can't have a bunch of people doing their own thing.
Right.
What made it easy for us in Kansas City is we already had a common radio system. The entire metropolitan area is on a common radio system. So
that's a huge advantage, and if you remember, Fred, that was a big problem on September 11th.
Yeah.
The inability for even the FDNY and NYPD to communicate with each other was problematic. So that's a huge advantage what you have there. Describe how that works for me, will you please?
Yeah. So whenever it goes out to bid, I think we're due for a new radio system in 3 years. I won't be around to see it, but I'm sure it'll work same as it has all the other ones. They'll go out to bid. They'll decide who's going to get it, and every agency will get that radio system. Every PSAP, the public safety answering points, will all.
So let me just stop you. Then they're all entitled to be on that system.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So they'll be on it. Obviously, as the systems have gotten more robust over the years with Motorola and things like that, the amount of frequencies available. So we have regional channels for everything you can think of, from fire, EMS, public works. When we have an incident in Kansas City, there's a channel for it, and there's the ability to patch. We have a set of channels just for pursuits, because our pursuits don't get to the Missouri line and go, oh, I can't go in there. They're bouncing back and forth 100 times in a pursuit. We have dedicated pursuits. So if my agency, for example, kicks up a pursuit tonight, it'll immediately get patched out over that common pursuit channel, and everybody automatically hears it.
So they're alerted.
They're alerted, and they have the ability to jump on it, so that during a pursuit, we have everybody that needs to be on it.
You have a kind of a unique situation because it's a 2-state thing, right? And sure, fire and EMS are not bound by the legalities like law enforcement is. So how did you guys tackle that issue? Because if I'm a cop in New York, for me, I'm not a cop in New Jersey, right? And vice versa. So how'd you guys address that?
That became the big hurdle, and that was about a 12-year project. It started out, we got parts of it done in the first couple of years. So both states, Kansas and Missouri, we already had different forms of mutual aid legislation. There was some forms of mutual aid that allowed the sheriff to ask for help from another sheriff across state lines or county lines. There was already state statute that allowed in natural disasters for the governor to activate, through EMAC or whatever. So we had all these little pockets of mutual aid, but none of them addressed how do we do it quickly, i.e. an active shooting event. or a terrorist event where there's not time to go, hey, I got to get this MOU signed. And like I told you before, we have like 106 jurisdictions just in our region. Can you imagine the legalities and trying to get 106 lawyers to agree on anything? So that was off the table. We knew that wasn't going to happen. Time didn't afford us the opportunity to call the governor every time we needed something, or the two governors. MOUs went out the window. We tried getting the feds to take a stab at deputizing the SWAT team, and they're like, yeah, we're not doing that. That's too much liability. So what ended up happening is some legislation was drafted on both sides of the state line that over that period created mutual law enforcement mutual aid legislation that really, really took it down to the most simple form possible. And that came down to the chief executive of a law enforcement agency or their designee, and that's completely up to them, can make a request to any other law enforcement agency in the United States for whatever level of assistance they needed. So we created legislation that really kind of brought it down to the simplest form where the chief executive or their designee can make a request to any law enforcement agency in the United States. And if that request is approved by the agency coming in, if they, if New York City said, yeah, we'll be happy to come to Gladstone and help you all out, as soon as they cross into Missouri, they've got legal jurisdiction.
That's interesting because you would have had, I'm sure you would have had it in place already, because like the ability to pursue for different crimes between states. But this is a much broader thing we're talking about here.
100%.
Correct?
Yep, it's any request for assistance. So it placed all that authority where it needed to be on the ground rather than in a bunch of lawyers' offices to try to make these decisions. Workers' comp and all that falls on the responding agency, just like it would if they were working any other job anywhere else. But the liability is addressed as well. As long as they're acting within the scope of their authority and in good faith, they fall under the same scope of liability they would if they were working in their home agency.
Okay. So let me ask you this. So, this is different than consolidation, very different than consolidation, what you call regionalization. Did you get any resistance from any of the member cities or towns, or was everybody pretty much on board from the start? How did that work?
Yeah, I don't know if there was really any resistance. I mean, everybody saw it for what it was. It was a true regional asset. They knew that if something happened, that all they had to do was make that phone call or that call for assistance, and they were going to get the cavalry. Whether it was, for an active shooting or some kind of WND event or the riots, a couple of years ago, that was the first time, to my recollection, that was one of the first times that actual law got put into place. It allowed the chief from Kansas City, Missouri, to call for assistance, and you had Kansas officers coming across to work the riots in 21 and 20 and 21. I think because we were so good at collaboration to begin with in the metro, whether it was, we have a major case metro squad that's staffed by both sides. So like a fresh homicide, an agency doesn't have the staff, they can call metro squad. We do that so often. I think it had set the table for something like this to be successful. Now what we're seeing is that same kind of mentality going into things like 911 centers, where it's becoming increasingly expensive to run your own center, to staff your own center. And that's what led to us doing it when we built out our new headquarters 3 years ago.
Do your 911 centers or your command, your communication centers, are they part of this regional regional collaboration?
From an equipment standpoint, yes. So everything in that region, collaboration wise, falls under it's called the Mid America Regional Council, and that is governed by the Regional Homeland Security Coordinating Committee, and then under that are all these various subcommittees. So law enforcement has a subcommittee, public health has a subcommittee. So as funds are spent, the requests come up through the subcommittees for recommendations. Then the overall committee votes on it and approves that spending or whatever. Well, the regional radio system is one of its own committee. So when they go to purchase new equipment, everybody in the region is all in. You get
so everybody's involved. They're invested in that effort. Correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think ours was the first one that did it here 3 years ago, but we now have we call it co-located. So the county that I'm in, my agency, and one other agency within our county, when we built our new headquarters here 3 years ago, we built out a comm center to move those other two agencies into ours. So right now we have 3 different agencies working out of the same comm center. They're considered co-located. So we retained our own employees, but because the equipment, the radio systems, the CAD systems, we were all using the same ones, same records management systems. We were already using the same system amongst the 3 of us. It made it very easy to put everybody in the same room. And where that benefited us, every few years they change all this equipment out. Well, there's certain pieces of equipment that have to go with a PSAP. One example is a router. I'm learning all this stuff as they're telling me I got to buy it. So this particular router, every PSAP in the region had to have this particular router. That router was $100,000. Because we were a shared PSAP, we got to divide that amongst 3 different agencies. Instead of paying the full $100,000 for one piece of equipment, we split those costs. And we did that with that entire center, with the goal, I think, at some point of probably consolidating it, making its own entity like I experienced when I was in Wichita. That was truly a consolidated system rather than co-located like we have here.
Okay, but still, you're way ahead of the game in the sense that it's shared resources,
Yeah.
shared costs, right?
Yes.
So you're much closer to being able to do that consolidation simply because of your situation like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very interesting. Can you give us an example of an incident where this has paid off recently? Large or small incident, whatever one you think comes to mind.
100%. We were hosts for FIFA here the last month and a half. So we had agencies from both sides of the state line working these events. We had a command post, an emergency operations center that ran the entire thing. Feds, local, state were all operating out of the same center. Same shared radio system made it extremely easy to communicate. Those individual specialty teams were all stood up and ready to go should the need arise. Everything from the hospital systems that are also part of this system, their ability to coordinate and triage and move patients from ERs, all that's done under this same level of cooperation.
That's an interesting aspect of it because normally these things are focused on law enforcement, fire, EMS, that kind of thing. But you also have your medical facilities are also involved in that regionalization.
They have their own committee within that Mid-America Regional Council. Public Works has its own. So if we had, we have a tornado here or two every once in a while, and when they come through, they're usually messy, and even Public Works falls within that. So all the Public Works agencies can be mobilized to go to certain areas that are needed. Imagine the services provided by one agency anywhere. Now multiply that by all those agencies kicking in their own resources and making this mega resource. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. No. It's an interesting concept, and I think it has a lot of merit, and I think a lot of other places should be looking at it. Fred, is there anything else you'd want to share with our audience before we conclude here?
I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share our little piece of the heartland. We try to keep it a secret, a little bit, but I think it's worked for a lot of years. I think you're going to see more and more parts of the country. They're going to be forced to do it, Chuck. It's such an expensive game anymore that you can't keep ahead of the technology if you're trying to do it by yourself. The telecom, you can't do it by yourself, and you're really shorting it yourself if you don't check the egos at the door, get calm heads in the room, go, look, how can we all work together? And in these committees that I'm talking about, I'm on the Homeland Security Coordinating Committee. That's made up of every one of these disciplines that I talked about. And you know what? We all know each other. And it's hard to be a jerk to somebody when you're in a meeting with them once a month and you've got a name with a face.
Especially when you sit across the table, right? And you're not doing it on social media.
Exactly. We all get along and we work for the common good, and we found ways to spend that tax money responsibly and be stewards of those tax dollars in a way that our region gets the most bang for the buck.
That's great. It really is, Fred. Thanks for all that. And listen, that's valuable information because, like I said, on September 11th, 2001, arguably the two largest local police and fire agencies in the country, we needed help, and so what you're doing there, you have operationalized what I think is a really sound and sensible regionalization of your assets. Congratulations to you and everybody else out there, and thanks for spending time this evening with us on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.